The cold winds howled through the desolate forest as the sun dipped below the horizon, casting shadows that danced ominously among the trees. In the heart of the Connecticut woods, a figure darted between the trunks, his breath visible in the frigid air. Joseph Sullivan, a man of unyielding determination, clutched a worn leather satchel tightly against his chest, its contents concealed from the prying eyes of men whose purpose weighed heavily on the freedom of others. This was December 1944, a time when the world was embroiled in chaos. But for Joseph, the choice was simple: risk everything to save lives. "Faster! We must reach the border before dawn," he whispered urgently to the small group of refugees huddled close behind him. They were ghosts of despair, faces etched with fear and uncertainty, fleeing the horrors of a war that had consumed their homes. Joseph turned back, his eyes locking with the fearful gaze of a young mother clutching her child tightly. He had promised her safety, but the shadows of war were relentless, and time was slipping away. Minutes turned into an eternity as they pressed on, the crunch of snow beneath their feet echoing the urgency of their plight. The border was mere miles away, but every rustle of leaves sent a shiver of dread through their bones. It was not just the soldiers they feared, but also the indifference of history, the possibility that their sacrifices would be lost or forgotten. Joseph was not a soldier. He was a civilian caught in a tide far greater than himself. Yet, he carried the weight of humanity's hope on his shoulders. As they reached a clearing, the sound of distant engines hummed ominously in the air. A patrol was near. Joseph's heart raced. It was in moments like this that decisions became life or death, where the line between heroism and folly blurred. He raised a hand to signal the group to hide, finding cover among the thick brush, concealing their presence just as the night concealed their fate. But what would happen if they were found? What story would be told of their journey? Would history remember Joseph as a smuggler or a savior? The weight of the unknown pressed heavily upon him. Would his efforts to save the innocent be recorded in the annals of time? Or would they fade away into the silence of the archives, lost amid the echoes of a brutal war? In the ensuing silence, a tension hung thick in the air, punctuated only by the sound of the engine drawing closer. Joseph's mind raced, filled with images of the families he sought to protect, and the potential for their lives to vanish in an instant. The urgency of the moment was palpable, a reminder that the flicker of hope could be extinguished at any moment. As the headlights pierced the darkness, illuminating the trees, Joseph knew he had to act. He would not let this story be buried. The choice was now or never, and the world stood still, waiting for the secret of his bravery to unfold. Joseph Sullivan was not a soldier, nor an officer adorned with medals. He was a farmer, a husband and a father, living in a modest home just on the outskirts of Hartford, Connecticut. Born in 1915, he grew up in the rolling hills of New England, where he learned the value of hard work from an early age. His hands were calloused from years spent tilling the earth, and his heart was as vast as the fields of corn he tended. Yet, as the war raged across Europe, a different calling tugged at his spirit, a calling that would forever alter the course of his life. The world Joseph knew was shrouded in anxiety and fear. News of Nazi atrocities spread like wildfire, igniting a fire within him that demanded action. He had always been a man of compassion, deeply affected by the stories of suffering that reached him through newspapers and radio broadcasts. As he listened to reports of families torn apart and innocents hunted like animals, he knew he could not stand idly by. The notion of smuggling war refugees across the border began as a flicker of an idea, a whisper in the wind that grew louder with each passing day. It was a chilly autumn evening in 1944 when Joseph made his decision. His wife, Mary, noticed the change in his demeanor, the furrowed brow and distant gaze that spoke of a burden he could not shake. She had long admired his sense of justice and kindness, but the weight of this new undertaking worried her. "You're risking everything, Joe," she cautioned one night, her voice trembling. "They will come after you if they find out." But Joseph's resolve was unyielding. He could not turn away from those in desperate need. Joseph's first encounter with a refugee came by chance. While working late one afternoon, he stumbled upon a young woman hiding in the woods near his farm. She was gaunt and terrified, her eyes wide with fear, and the remnants of her once vibrant clothing hung from her frail frame. Her name was Anna, and she had fled from a small village in France, managing to evade the Nazis who had decimated her community. Joseph saw the hope flickering in her eyes and knew then that he was destined to help her. Under the cover of night, they devised plans to transport Anna across the border into Canada, where she would be safe from the horrors of the war. The logistics were daunting, the roads were patrolled by soldiers, and the risks were immense. But Joseph was undeterred. He fashioned a hidden compartment in the back of his old pickup truck, a space where Anna could hide amongst crates of apples and sacks of feed. Every trip he made felt like a step into the unknown. Yet with each successful crossing, a sense of purpose bloomed within him. The cold winter months brought even greater challenges. Snow blanketed the landscape, transforming the familiar woods into a treacherous maze that threatened to swallow them whole. The biting winds howled like ghosts, reminding Joseph of the dangers lurking in the shadows. Yet, he remained steadfast. In the stillness of the night, he heard not only the crunch of snow beneath his boots, but the soft whispers of those he had vowed to protect. Each life he helped escape from the clutches of tyranny became a beacon of hope, fueling his resolve. But the stakes grew higher as the authorities began to tighten their grip on the borders. Rumors of increased patrols and spies infiltrating local communities spread like wildfire. Joseph felt the pressure mounting around him, but he was determined to continue his work. He sought out others who shared his cause, men and women who understood the urgency of the moment. Together, they formed a network of compassion, a small yet fierce resistance against the tide of fear. As the months passed, Joseph's actions remained cloaked in secrecy, known only to a few. Each success came with its own set of dangers, but he embraced the risks, believing fiercely in the humanity that united them all. He was not merely a farmer anymore. He had become a lifeline for those who had lost everything. Yet, as history would have it, all stories have their silences. Little did he know that the sacrifices he made would eventually fade into the shadows of time, buried under the weight of bureaucracy and the passage of years. The archives would remain silent, and the legacy of his bravery would drift into obscurity, until it would be unearthed again by the curious hands of his descendants, years later, yearning to connect with the past and uncover the truth behind their grandfather's quiet heroism. The late autumn air in 1944 was thick with the scent of damp earth and fallen leaves as Joseph Sullivan prepared for his secret mission. The chill of the Connecticut evening bit through his coat as he secured his truck. It was a stark contrast to his peaceful life as a farmer, but the world was fractured, and he felt compelled to act. War had unleashed a tide of refugees fleeing unimaginable horrors across the Atlantic, searching for safety in the United States. His heart ached for them. He had chosen to be their lifeline. Joseph's old Ford, chipped and faded, would serve as a vessel of hope. He had heard from a contact in New York City that a group of refugees was waiting just across the Canadian border. The plan was simple yet perilous: collect them at night and transport them to a safe house. As the sun dipped below the horizon, casting long shadows, Joseph climbed into the driver's seat, his heart racing with anticipation and dread. He had never attempted anything like this before. The stakes were high. If caught, the consequences could be dire for him and those he aimed to rescue. Gripping the steering wheel tightly, Joseph drove into the darkness. The road to the border was lined with towering trees, their branches swaying ominously in the cold wind. Joseph's mind raced with thoughts of the refugees he was to meet. Each mile felt eternal, every sound amplified. The crunch of gravel under his tires, rustling leaves, and distant owl calls heightened his sense of isolation. After what felt like hours, he reached the rendezvous point, a secluded clearing beyond the last checkpoint before Canada. The moon cast silver beams through the trees, illuminating the frost-kissed grass. Joseph's heart thudded as he stepped out of the truck, scanning the area for any sign of life. Time was of the essence. He needed to act quickly. Moments later, hurried whispers and soft footsteps approached from the shadows. A small group of men, women, and children emerged, their faces pale and drawn, eyes wide with fear and relief. They had traveled for days, dodging patrols to escape war's ravages. Joseph welcomed them with open arms, offering comfort in their native tongues, though he felt the weight of the world pressing down on him. As they climbed into the back of his truck, Joseph assessed the situation. A young couple with a small child and an elderly man with a suitcase. Each represented a story lost to chaos. Starting the engine, he felt a surge of determination as he drove away from the clearing, headlights piercing the darkness toward safety. However, as they crossed the border, tension grew palpable. The refugees whispered nervously, glancing at the trees. Suddenly, red and blue lights appeared in the distance, illuminating the night sky. Joseph's heart raced. He had hoped to avoid border patrols. In that instant, time slowed. He could hear his heartbeat drowning out the whispers. Panic surged as he wrestled with the steering wheel, searching for an escape route. But there was none. The road ahead was barren. In desperation, he veered off the main road into dense underbrush, hoping to evade capture. The refugees gasped, clinging to one another in fear. What happened next would haunt him forever. The truck lurched, tires spinning against the ground. Then a sickening thud echoed as they struck a tree. Silence descended like a heavy shroud. When Joseph regained his bearings, he realized the truck was a crumpled mass of metal, the night eerily still around them. Turning to check on the refugees, his heart sank. The back of the truck was empty. In an instant, they had vanished into the darkness. This was the last time Joseph Sullivan was seen alive. The silence of the archives would bury his story, leaving only shadows and questions in its wake. Joseph Sullivan's mission had begun in earnest, but uncovering the truth about his clandestine activities was fraught with challenges. As cold winds swirled around him, Joseph navigated unpaved roads, the crunch of gravel a reminder of the risks he faced. He wasn't merely transporting supplies. He was carrying lives. Each journey across the border meant danger, not just from authorities but from potential betrayal lurking in the shadows. Back home, his family remained blissfully unaware of the gravity of his actions. They thought he was delivering goods to neighboring farmers, ignorant of the desperate souls hiding in his truck. Joseph had chosen this life of deception because he valued human life over the rigid laws of a fearful nation. Each night, as he parked the truck in the barn, the scent of oil mingled with the crisp air, and the anxiety of being discovered gnawed at him. As weeks passed, Joseph's network grew. He collaborated with local residents, farmers, and city dwellers who had seen the horrors of war. They exchanged whispered conversations over coffee in dimly lit basements, plotting routes and safe havens. However, as his operation expanded, complications arose. Rumors spread, and Joseph realized not everyone shared his altruistic ideals. Paranoia seeped into the group with whispers of informants and traitors echoing around their makeshift meetings. One particularly frigid night, Joseph sat in the dim light of the barn, poring over maps of potential routes. Suddenly, a knock at the barn door jolted him. Heart racing, he cautiously opened it to find Margaret, a local schoolteacher whose husband had been captured overseas. She had quietly supported his mission, but now bore unsettling news. "They're on to us, Joseph," she whispered. "I heard the sheriff talking. They're tightening their grip on the border." A palpable sense of dread enveloped Joseph. The fragile threads connecting his network began to unravel. Fear gripped him, but he couldn't back down. Too many lives depended on his courage. He promised to be more cautious, but as Margaret left, the enormity of their situation weighed heavily on him. The following weeks blurred with tension. Joseph doubled back on familiar routes, his heart racing at every checkpoint. He meticulously examined every detail of his operation, but trust became a rare commodity. The initial excitement of helping others turned into a suffocating anxiety. Each turn could lead to disaster. Amidst this chaos, Joseph received a lead from an old friend, a former soldier, who claimed to know of a larger smuggling network near the border. Eager to learn more, he arranged to meet in a secluded patch of woods, away from prying eyes. As he approached the meeting point, shadows danced ominously among the trees. Joseph scanned the surroundings, but upon reaching the clearing, he found nothing but the rustling wind. His friend never arrived. Confusion turned to frustration, and distrust clouded his thoughts. Had he been betrayed? Was this a trap? In that moment, the weight of the mission pressed down on him with newfound intensity. Joseph realized that his path wasn't just about smuggling refugees. It was navigating a labyrinth of human morality, where every decision carried devastating consequences. The loss of his friend, whether permanent or temporary, was a profound blow, reverberating through his efforts to save lives. Have you ever faced a moment where everything unraveled, where the stakes were perilous? Share your thoughts. Do you believe in the resilience of the human spirit, even amidst despair? The frost had settled over Connecticut, and the world felt muted as Maggie Sullivan rummaged through her late grandfather's belongings in the attic. She had always known Joseph Sullivan as a gentle farmer, a man whose hands were as skilled at tilling the soil as they were at carving wooden trinkets for his grandchildren. Yet, it was the stories of his youth that lingered in her mind, fragments shared during long summer evenings, each one tinged with silence and the weight of secrets. It was in November 1989, decades after the war, that the curiosity struck her. An article in the local newspaper detailed the struggles of war refugees, many still seeking asylum, resonating with her grandfather's tales of bravery. Inspired, Maggie decided it was time to delve deeper into Joseph's past. She had inherited a few boxes of his effects, but much remained shrouded in mystery. As she sifted through the dusty boxes, her fingers brushed against a bound stack of yellowed papers. The brittle pages felt fragile, yet they contained a world of memories waiting to be unearthed. Among them, she discovered letters addressed to various contacts across the border, names scribbled hastily, but the urgency in the ink was palpable. The contents spoke of clandestine meetings, desperate plans, and the unwavering hope of those seeking refuge from a war that raged beyond America's borders. The most striking piece was a faded photograph tucked away in one of the envelopes. It showed a group of solemn faces, men, women, and children, huddled together in a small clearing, their expressions a mix of fear and resilience. Joseph stood among them, a stoic figure, hand resting gently on a little girl who looked up at him with wide, hopeful eyes. The weight of the image enveloped Maggie. It was a testament not only to her grandfather's courage, but to the profound silence that had surrounded his actions. Driven by a newfound purpose, Maggie embarked on a journey to uncover the truth behind these letters. She visited local archives and libraries, poring over the microfilm of old newspapers and government documents. She learned about the clandestine operations that swept through the region during the war, tales of ordinary citizens risking everything to aid those escaping tyranny. Each piece of evidence pulled her deeper into a narrative of secrecy and heroism that had long been forgotten. Weeks turned into months, and with every discovery, Maggie faced obstacles. Many records had been lost to time, and others were buried in bureaucratic red tape. But she persisted, unearthing whispers of Joseph's network, a network that sought to guide refugees through hidden routes into the safety of America. The cold autumn air became her companion, as she traced old roads that Joseph had traveled, imagining the weight of the lives he carried in his truck. As the winter snow began to blanket the ground, she stumbled upon a long-lost archive. It was a dusty room brimming with documents, and there, tucked between two heavy ledger books, lay an official report on civilian aid efforts during the war. Her heart raced as she located a passage detailing her grandfather's activities, the very missions he had once described in hushed tones. The report painted him not just as a farmer, but as a crucial player in a larger effort to save lives. Maggie's emotions swelled as she absorbed the weight of her grandfather's legacy. The report spoke of a clandestine crossing where Joseph had helped transport a group of 10 refugees, their faces now alive in her mind thanks to the photograph. The risk he took was immense. The possibility of being discovered by authorities lurked in every shadow. Yet, his compassion propelled him forward, a beacon in a time of desperation. In that moment, Maggie understood the silence that had cloaked Joseph's actions. It was not just a secret kept to protect his family from the weight of war. It was also an acknowledgement of the fragile nature of heroism, during a time that often rewarded complicity over bravery. The archive had validated his story, granting it the respect it deserved, and she felt an overwhelming desire to share it with the world. As she returned home, the image of the little girl lingered in her thoughts, and she whispered a promise into the winter night. Joseph Sullivan would not remain a ghost of the past. His actions would rise from the silence, a testament to humanity in the darkest of times. In the heart of Connecticut, a legacy was being reborn, and with it, the stories of those who sought freedom would finally be told. The sun dipped below the horizon, painting the Connecticut sky in hues of orange and purple, as a sense of urgency enveloped Joseph Sullivan's world. It was late November 1944 when everything changed, a moment that would ripple through decades and generations. The second-hand diary he meticulously kept wasn't just a record of his daily life. It was a chronicle of bravery, sacrifice, and the untold stories of those he helped. Refugees fleeing the oppressive grip of war-torn Europe. Joseph had often scribbled details about his clandestine operations. He referred to the refugees as the lost souls. Each entry painted a vivid portrait of their desperation and hope. The stark contrast between their reality and his quiet farm life gnawed at his conscience. On this particular evening, the wind howled through the trees, echoing the plight of those who risked everything for a sliver of hope. Joseph recalled the last group he had managed to assist, a family from Poland, parents and 2 young children, their faces etched with fear and uncertainty. As he drove them through the cover of night, the headlights of his truck cut through the darkness, illuminating the path ahead. Each bump in the road reminded him of the perils they faced. Every shadow lurking in the corners of his vision heightened his anxiety. Would they be caught? Would his actions lead to imprisonment or worse? Yet the image of the children clinging to their parents, eyes wide with fear yet flickering with hope, propelled him onward. The journey was fraught with obstacles. The constant threat of patrols, the fear of betrayal, the weight of the consequences that loomed large over his mission. Joseph had devised a network of safe houses, drawing on the trust of local farmers who shared his conviction that compassion must prevail over indifference. But he could never have anticipated how close he would come to losing everything. One night, while sheltering a group in a barn, Joseph heard the crackle of radios outside, the unmistakable sound of agents on the hunt. He had to act quickly. With an urgency that belied his calm demeanor, he ushered the refugees into a hidden compartment within the barn, a place he had prepared for such emergencies. The air was thick with palpable fear as he reassured them in hushed tones. "Stay quiet. They won't find you here." With the agents searching just outside, Joseph knew that a single misstep could spell disaster. Not just for him, but for those he had taken the risk to save. As the minutes ticked by like hours, he held his breath, listening intently for any sounds that might betray him. When the agents finally moved on, Joseph felt a rush of relief mingled with dread. He had managed to protect them for another night, but the weight of his secret grew heavier each day. Years later, as Joseph's family began to sift through his belongings after his passing, they unearthed the diary. The faded ink revealed a life steeped in humility and bravery, a life spent in the shadows of society, a life that had been marked by the sacrifices he made for others. While researching the history of those he had aided, they discovered that some had successfully made it to America, their lives forever altered by Joseph's kindness. One entry mentioned a young boy named Tomas, who had been separated from his family amid the chaos. Joseph's heartache was evident as he described the moment he had to say goodbye, promising him that he would find his family. The family later learned that Thomas had indeed reached the United States, adopted by a kind couple in New York, and had grown into a successful artist, using his craft to tell the stories of those who had suffered. Joseph had never known this. His silent heroism had unwittingly shaped lives. In the summer of 1945, as the war drew to a close, Joseph Sullivan's mission quietly ended. His actions remained hidden, buried in the silence of archives, overshadowed by the grand narratives of history. Yet, through the diary, the truth emerged. One man's bravery in the face of overwhelming odds, his willingness to risk it all for those in need. The discovery of the diary not only shed light on a forgotten hero, but also served as a poignant reminder of the threads that connect humanity across time and space. Joseph's legacy was not just about the lives he saved, it was about the power of compassion, a lesson that resonated long after the echoes of war had quieted. His story finally found its voice, emerging from the shadows and into the light, as a testament to the enduring human spirit. As the decades unfolded, Joseph Sullivan's clandestine work faded into the shadows of history, buried beneath layers of bureaucracy and silent archives. It wasn't until 2018 that his granddaughter, Emily Sullivan, stumbled upon an old newspaper clipping while rummaging through her grandmother's attic. The article, yellowed and brittle, was dated December 1944 and reported on a network of local civilians aiding war refugees. It mentioned a kind-hearted farmer from Connecticut who had been instrumental in transporting families across the border. The name, Joseph Sullivan, sent shivers down Emily's spine. It was her grandfather, a man whose heroism had long slipped into obscurity. Motivated by a mix of pride and curiosity, Emily embarked on a quest to unearth the truth about her grandfather's contributions during one of humanity's darkest chapters. She spent countless hours at libraries, combing through archived newspapers and military records. With each fragment of information, a new layer of Joseph's life emerged. Emily learned about the dangers he faced, the ever-watchful eyes of the authorities, the treacherous crossings, and the immense moral weight of his decisions. She discovered that Joseph had not only risked his own life, but had also forged alliances with other brave souls, both local and European, who shared his commitment to saving lives. As the pieces came together, Emily realized the breadth of Joseph's impact. He had facilitated the escape of over 100 refugees, many of whom were Jewish families fleeing Nazi persecution. The stories began to surface. Survivors who had settled in Connecticut, eager to share how one farmer's courage made all the difference in their lives. They recounted how Joseph had hidden them in his truck among sacks of grain, and how he had navigated perilous back roads to ensure their safe passage. These men and women, now elderly, became living testaments to his legacy, their eyes welling with tears as they spoke of the kindness that had saved them from despair. In an effort to properly honor her grandfather, Emily organized a community event in the small town where Joseph had lived and worked. It was a chilly autumn day in 2019 as she stood before a gathering of friends, family, and townsfolk at the local community center. The walls were adorned with photographs of Joseph, interspersed with images of the refugees he helped. She spoke passionately about her grandfather's life, his values, and the sacrifices he made during the war, emphasizing that his actions reflected the true spirit of humanity. The event resonated deeply within the community. Local historians and journalists attended, intrigued by the rediscovered story of a humble farmer turned hero. This rekindled interest led to a collaborative project with the town's historical society to create a permanent exhibit honoring Joseph's legacy. Artifacts from the war, documents related to the refugee crisis, and personal accounts were gathered, forming a narrative that highlighted not only Joseph's story, but also the collective resilience of those he aided. As the exhibit took shape, Emily felt a profound sense of connection to her grandfather. The walls of the Historical Society echoed the laughter and tears of those who had survived due to his bravery. The story was no longer just a personal mission to recover her grandfather's name. It had morphed into a community endeavor to remember the sacrifice and courage of countless others who had suffered during the war. On the opening day of the exhibit, a significant moment unfolded. A group of refugees' descendants who had traveled from different states arrived to pay homage. They shared their own tales of survival and resilience, and the room was filled with emotion as they honored Joseph's memory, recognizing him not only as a rescuer, but as a symbol of hope. The exhibit became a focal point for educational programs, outreach efforts, and discussions on humanitarianism. Schools began to incorporate Joseph's story into their curricula, teaching young students the importance of compassion and the impact of individual actions during times of strife. Emily watched as her grandfather's legacy blossomed, his name no longer buried in silence but celebrated as a beacon of courage and mercy. Finally, Joseph Sullivan's once obscured story transformed into a profound reminder of the strength of one individual standing against the tide of hatred and war. The archives, which had once concealed his efforts, became a testament to resilience and the enduring power of humanity. As Emily reflected on the journey, she felt a deep sense of closure, not just for herself, but for all those who had been touched by her grandfather's unwavering bravery. In the quiet countryside of Connecticut, where the last of the autumn leaves danced to the ground, the echoes of Joseph Sullivan's secret mission reverberated through time. The year was now 2023, and what was once a buried tale of bravery had resurfaced, intertwined with the lives of those who had never forgotten. In a small town hall, old photographs and fading letters were displayed under a glass case, a tribute to an unsung hero. Joseph's story, once veiled in silence, was being retold, igniting a spark of recognition in the hearts of his descendants and the community. His grandson, Michael Sullivan, stood in front of the display, feeling the weight of his grandfather's choices. Michael had recently stumbled upon an old trunk in the attic, filled with memorabilia from a time long past. Among the dusty relics was a yellowing diary, pages fragile yet vibrant with the ink of memories. It was there that Joseph had poured his heart, detailing the nights spent navigating the back roads, smuggling war refugees across the border, risking everything for the sake of humanity. Michael felt connected to this man whose courage had shaped his family's legacy. As he read through the entries, every word painted a vivid picture of desperation and hope. Joseph's accounts of the refugees he aided came alive. Families torn apart, children clutching their parents' hands, eyes wide with fear. The diary captured the essence of those harrowing nights. The freezing air, the whispered conversations, the narrow escapes from the watchful eyes of authorities. Michael could almost hear the rumble of the old Ford's engine, the creaking of its worn suspension as it carried its precious cargo toward safety. Despite the heroism documented in those pages, it was evident that Joseph had carried the burden of his actions deeply. The war had left scars that lingered long after the last gunshot echoed. In the diary, he expressed his fears of being discovered, his anguish over the lives that would remain lost if he failed. Yet, amidst the turmoil, there was an unwavering resolve, a commitment to act against the tide of indifference that often swept through society. Michael understood that re-establishing Joseph's narrative wasn't merely about recounting the past. It was about illuminating the present. Each story shared with the community stirred conversations about compassion and the moral obligation to help those in need. It was a poignant reminder that the legacy of one man could inspire many to take a stand, to confront their own apathy in times of crisis. As the community gathered to commemorate Joseph, they lit candles in his honor. Flickering flames danced against the evening sky, representing the lives he had touched. Stories were exchanged, laughter and tears mingled, and the shared humanity in those moments forged a bond among the attendees. In a world fraught with division, Joseph's legacy served as a beacon, a call to action that echoed beyond the confines of history. With the discovery of his grandfather's actions, Michael felt a sense of duty to continue the work that Joseph had started. He began collaborating with local organizations focused on refugee assistance, sharing his grandfather's story as a means to raise awareness. Each presentation became a platform to discuss not only Joseph's bravery, but also the ongoing struggles faced by countless individuals seeking safety from war and persecution today. As he concluded his first public talk, Michael looked into the eyes of those listening, young students, families, elderly veterans, and saw a flicker of determination ignited within them. The story of his grandfather was no longer just a memory. It was a movement. In reflecting on his grandfather's life, Michael was reminded that the stories of our ancestors do not solely belong to the past. They are living lessons that inspire and empower future generations. They remind us that silence can be a weapon of complicity, while our voices can carry the hope of change. So, as we remember Joseph Sullivan, let us also remember that the fight for humanity does not end with one act of courage. It lives on in each of us, waiting to be awakened. If you believe in the power of stories to change lives and inspire action, share this journey and join the conversation. Together, we can ensure that the echoes of the past resonate through the actions of the present. Let us not forget, for in remembering, we honor the lives that were touched and the truths that demand to be told.